Welcome to the Athletics Week in Football, brought to you by BOYLE Sports. A Premier League manager has been sacked just after 3 games. But was it fair? And who else is under pressure so early on in the season? Right, to delve into the detail, we've got Alex Barker and JJ Bull. Right, I wanted to start with Nuno Espirito Santo, but I was just thinking, you know what, let's save that till later. Let that be the icing on the cake. As we're talking about managers under pressure, I think we have to start with Manchester United and Ruben Amorim. Right, the guy has had a pre-season. He spent over 250 million euros. Sounds like he's getting the kind of players that he wants. But Alex, level with me. Is there any evidence that this Manchester United team might just be slightly better than last season?
I think slightly better. I think that's definitely fair. I'm not sure how much better they are though, because I went back and looked at a couple of their games, one back in January, one more recently, and I found that they're still suffering from the same problems from early on in Ruben Amorim's tenure.
Break it down.
Well, to show that, let's look at Manchester United versus Fulham, the same fixture twice, once in January and the more recent game in August. So let's start with the game in January and look at some of the problems that surfaced in this match. Now, for the uninitiated, Ruben Amorim's back three, they play a crucial role in making sure the midfield doesn't get overloaded. Manchester United play a midfield two, so if Harry Wilson for Fulham, for example, he drops inside and looks to overload that midfield, then it's down to Lisandro Martinez, the wide centre-back, to track him to stop that taking place. John McKenzie did a really good short on this. He's the man I've hid in a cupboard to steal his seat. So let's see how that actually worked in practice in the January game. There were some problems, I think, on an individual level that might not be Ruben Amorim's fault. Here's Calvin Bassey, Manchester United pressing high up the pitch, and Bassey's going to play a ball between these two midfielders. And when he does, Alex Iwobi is free to receive the ball between the lines because Matthias de Ligt, who's meant to be tracking him, is too slow to track him. This could be down to him just like being slow to recognise this, or maybe he's just too slow. De Ligt isn't a particularly mobile centre-back. That's not on Ruben Amorim, right? That was one individual problem. Another, I think, is maybe more of Ruben Amorim's own making, and that was Bruno Fernandes. Now, as we've seen recently, Amorim likes to play Bruno Fernandes in central midfield as one of the 2 8s rather than a 10. And Manchester United fans have sometimes been a bit confused by this. I do get the reasoning. I think on the ball, Bruno Fernandes is one of the best passers in the Premier League, right? So by playing him so deep, you get that benefit. But off the ball does come the consequence of the fact he's not a defensive midfielder. But here's one situation. Bassey wins the ball here while Man United are attacking, makes a loose touch, and Fernandes, to his credit, actually anticipates this and he moves out to try and get the ball. The problem is, just at the crucial moment, he loses confidence in himself. Fulham are able to play around Fernandes, move forwards, and Fernandes is desperately trying to run backwards to stop this attack. Again, he looks a bit out of place in this instance. But it wasn't just individual problems, okay? There was also tactical issues with this back three that Fulham were able to exploit. You could argue Marco Silva outsmarting Ruben Amorim's system here. Robinson's on the ball here. He's going to play the pass back to Bassey. And when this happens, Smith Rowe is going to drop in to try and receive the ball between the lines. At this point though, Lenny Yoro's on the pitch. And Yoro is a more mobile centre-back than de Ligt. I don't think that's controversial to say. So there's fewer excuses for him to not be tracking Smith Rowe here. The issue is that when this pass goes backwards, Fulham very cleverly push Robinson forwards while Smith Rowe drops in. And what this does, it pins Yoro. And by pinning, I mean Yoro can't come out to mark Smith Rowe because he has to stop Robinson running through on goal here. It would be a very terrible situation if he left this gap. So it leaves Smith Rowe completely free to receive the ball between the lines, turn, carry the ball forward, and if he plays this pass a bit earlier, again, who knows, could have been 1-0 Fulham. As it is, the attack kind of peters out. Man United do end up winning this game, so it's important not to be too harsh. But if we look at the stats, I mean, Fulham were largely dominant in this match, 9 shots to 4, for example. So an early game in Amorim's tenure didn't go so well, and I think this was like many other games against lower table sides in Amorim's tenure. So let's see how it's improved, right?
Please.
They've played Fulham recently. Maybe he's managed to solve these problems. To his credit, I do think that Manchester United on the ball have massively improved. So I'll say that straight away as a positive.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah, to not be too negative. Still, there were issues defensively, I'm afraid.
Oh, here you go.
Yeah, I'm getting back to it.
Go on.
Here's Joachim Andersen. He's going to play the pass forward to Sasa Lukic. This isn't my poor graphic design. This short arrow is to show it's a soft pass. It gives Bruno Fernandes, who's tracking Lukic, the chance to potentially put him under pressure. Fernandes, though, while he's relatively quick to put pressure on, he's not that fast, he's not that strong. Maybe if this was Carlos Baleba, a midfielder Man United were interested in signing, he puts Lukic under enough pressure to force him into a heavy touch or a bad pass, where you've got Mason Mount, Matheus Cunha and Boomer on the far side, all ready to pounce on it and launch a really dangerous attack. As it is, Fernandes' pressure isn't even enough to force Lukic into a bad pass. It goes straight back to where Anderson wants it. And while this is taking place, let's have a look at the top right-hand corner. We see Josh King has moved off Ahmad and just going past Yoro. And at this point, I think Ahmad should be communicating to Yoro, this is now your guy, because if he drops in between the lines, Yoro needs to mark him. That said, this is perhaps a difficult run for Yoro to track. If he moves with him, that's a big gap forming between the defenders. So maybe this is individual switching off, maybe it's also tactical. Nevertheless, Josh King gets free between the lines, like in January, completely free, centre-back's not tracking him, he gets the ball and launches another dangerous Fulham attack. So you could argue once again, individuals letting Ruben Amorim down, but these are individuals kind of his own making. He's playing Bruno Fernandes in midfield, right? Like, if Bruno Fernandes isn't good defensively, that's not necessarily on Bruno Fernandes. And I think what worries me a lot more, to be honest, is the fact that Fulham manipulated Amorim's system again, 8 months later, in a slightly different way, it's fair to say. This is much later in the game. Both teams are chasing the win here, and United have pressed high. Fulham are going to play the ball wide, and as this is taking shape, Iwobi has dropped in with Dalot tracking him. But as the ball goes wide, Dalot thinks, I need to move backwards into my shape. Fulham are about to play through us, and he points for someone else to track Iwobi here. Someone needs to pick him up. The issue is, both of Manchester United's midfielders are occupied tracking Fulham's midfielders. Iwobi is so far away from the centre-backs of Man United, they can't get out to press him because that would be a really risky move for them. So what Fulham have done is just create a massive overload. So when this ball eventually gets played through into midfield, he's completely free. He can have a ton of space to run into, in which he does. Plays it out wide to Robinson, at which point there are 4 Fulham players arriving at the back post in the 83rd minute of the game. If this cross had been strong, this could have been 2-1 Fulham and we could be talking about a Man United loss. As it is, the cross is too heavy, it goes over the Fulham players, it ends 1-1. But once again, in terms of XG, in terms of shots on target, Fulham the largely dominant side. And to bring it back to your question, Amorim's under pressure, can we see things improving? This worries me because for Amorim to improve, he needs to keep dispatching teams like Fulham. Manchester United need to be higher up the table. They need to make a habit of beating weaker sides. And if weaker sides are able to keep exploiting flaws in his system, that doesn't really bode well for him.
Okay, I mean, I will caveat it and say it's only 3 matches in, JJ. Could things potentially get better for Manchester United?
Yes. And you can already see the green shoots of progress, or in this graphic, I would say blue shoots. Yes. So this is a XG for and against over time. This is Man United's. As you can see, Ten Hag had a bit of a boost towards the end of the 22-23 season, and then this got much, much, much worse. So he made them quite bad. And Amorim inherited that and has tried to fix that. But you can see that it's starting to trend upwards, that they're starting to get better, more expected goals for and slightly fewer expected goals against. So that suggests they're doing well. But one of the things that's lobbied at Amorim is that he doesn't change from his system at all. He always plays the same system. So let's look at individual players and whether the things that are happening to Man United are either individual errors and just players doing things wrong, or if the system is at fault. And to do that, we're going to take on a team similar in might to Man United in Grimsby Town, who are 4th in League 2 at the time of filming, I think.
You're going there.
Grimsby are all right. They're okay. But observe, the ball's in the air, and it's Man United against the mighty Grimsby. The ball is in the air, and you've got 3 centre-backs, so that's good, that's what you want. You've got 2 centre midfielders, they're closing the gap here. It's a big long ball over the top, that's all fine. You've got 2 wing-backs who are tracking the 2 wide players. That's kind of what you want. When you're defending, you want the back 5, right? So you want your wide players to be protected by those, and the centre-backs can step out and deal with other problems that present themselves. You've also got Matheus Cunha dropping back in to help out, taking responsibility. This is what Man United have lacked. Players taking responsibility and making sure that everything's safe. So what you have here is Manuel Ugarte, one of the 2 midfielders. He's got the ball, but he's off balance and can't really control it. Matheus Cunha has dropped to the same position that he is in, taking responsibility, or in the wrong position, who knows? Because when he receives the ball, he then wants to knock it forward to where Matheus Cunha should be in the situation, so they can easily progress play, but he can't. Menu's standing watching it. I don't think Menu was ever really in the right defensive position at any point during this game. Cunha knocks it forward, gives the ball away. When he knocks it forward, the wing backs start to push up a bit. That's what I think Amorim wants that. He wants Dorgu to start getting forward so they can try and attack. But the ball's given away, Grimsby have possession again. What you can see is it's now a back four, so this is how the system should work. You can then have a back four situationally, and you can have Dorgu, who's this lad here, pushing up. However, Dorgu pushing up means that they've left the right winger in space. Now there are problems here, because should Dorgu be back here to protect against this guy, or should the left centre-back be pushing out to deal with him? I'm not sure which it should be. You'd have to ask Ruben Amorim. I don't know which one he wants to do this. And the other problem here is that there's no pressure put on the ball. Cunha should be pushing in, but Cunha doesn't push in. And also the other problem there is that there is too big a gap between the two centre midfielders. If Cunha wasn't here, it's an easy pass into loads of players between the lines. They've just easily found space between Man United's defence and the midfield all of a sudden, and this should not really happen. Lots of other problems that you can note down. No one's tracking this right winger, and if we look from an alternate angle, we can see the problems laid out. Look at the gap between the midfield line and the defensive line. Players don't know when to step out. They don't know who to be going to. They don't know where to go. Should Heaven be going to push in this player who's dropped in behind the lines? Should a midfielder drop into it? Should he be pushing into left back to deal with this right winger that Dorgu isn't looking after? I don't know. I don't know what Amorim wants here. Do the players know? I also don't know. And instead, the right winger is free to receive the ball, and they get in behind and they cross it, and nothing happens this time. But that's clearly not good because you're playing against Grimsby. Here's another example of something I don't think is good. This is Man United on the ball and the easy, simple pass to Matheus Cunha. This system is fine. It doesn't matter about the system. It doesn't matter. Because if you pass the ball to Matheus Cunha and he just doesn't control it and lets it go wrong and gives Grimsby the ball, that's not a system problem. That's just individual players being bad. That's just them not being good at football.
But Matheus Cunha at Wolves wasn't that bad.
He's a £75 million player or something like that. He shouldn't be doing that. How do you account for that? If you're the manager watching that happen, you're going like, well, what am I meant to do? I'm giving the ball away to Grimsby. Anyway, the ball lands with this player here. And what you've got now are more problems because this pass is easily on. And that pass is easily on because the midfield two are not tight together, not closing down either the player, not marking the player, they're not closing the gap either. And the reason they're doing that is because here's the two centre midfielders, and Ugarte's been pulled over to the side because the right winger is pulled out to the side because the left wing back, who should be marking him, is up here, where he should be. Because you have to anticipate that Cunha's going to control the ball. So that mistake by Cunha has knock-on effects, meaning that the left wing back's out of position, so therefore someone else has to go and deal with another problem, which means you have more knock-on problems. And so that is individual error compounding the errors within the system. Now, here's another example. Man United, on the ball against Grimsby Town. A simple pass to Ahmad here. There's actually a better pass on, which you could play if you have the skill level, and Sesko's making this run in behind. That would be better. But instead, he plays this short, easy pass to Ahmad. Easy situation. The system is fine, except Ahmad doesn't control it. It bounces loose, and then for whatever reason, Ugarte fouls him. As you'll observe, they're both upside down here.
It's like a comedy of errors.
You don't want this to happen, really. If you could choose this to happen in the game, you would not. Now, the ball is now with Grimsby in possession. Man United's system is now in a bit of trouble. This is the line he takes roughly, dribbling towards the Man United defence. Now you can see the two Grimsby wide players are in the spaces where the wing backs ought to be, but they've pushed on because that pass should have gone to Ahmad. That shouldn't be loose now. And what happens is, of course, they've got the space here, and so they try and correct. Heaven comes across as he should to try and close this player down. The midfielder dropping back in to try and help out as well, but there's too many knock-on problems. And of course, if you go towards the ball, if you're attracted towards the ball, you inevitably leave players alone on the other side. So what then happens is that Heaven gets close to the player on the ball, but this player is now free on the left-hand side. When the ball lands with him, do you know what happens? He shoots directly underneath the goalkeeper who lets it in. It's more errors individually. So like individual errors are making the system not work, but the system is leading to errors because players aren't sure exactly where to be and when. And when there's triggers like players having to run forward and then they miscontrol the ball, it leaves huge problems at the back. But if you're a good player at Man United level, you shouldn't be making those errors. And so Ruben Amorim must be doing his head in because he's coaching them what to do. Is his coaching not getting through? Are they not listening? Why are they not controlling a simple pass? I don't know.
I mean, my question is, people like Glasner, people like Gareth Southgate have been touted as sort of possible replacements for Ruben Amorim. Is it the manager that needs changing, or is it the personnel that needs changing?
If they took a new manager in, I think any manager they could get in would instantly start playing a 4-2-3-1, like a very basic thing, like we saw Ruben Nistelrooy do when he was there before, and they would probably be fine because players understand that role individually. There are things within the system that Amorim needs players to do to make it work, and when they do, it will probably work really well. but they keep not doing them. And one simple breakdown against Grimsby is causing them loads of problems. No disrespect to Grimsby, it should not be happening.
Yeah. Let's move on. And we need to talk about the Irons. I do like West Ham. And Graham Potter. He's had a bit of time now with this team. Things haven't looked that great at the beginning of the season. Players have come, players have gone. But are you seeing any evidence, Alex, so far that things could potentially get better anytime soon?
Yes. I'm going to be concrete and say, yes, I think I am seeing signs. I can't really back it up with statistics because if you look at all the numbers under Graham Potter, it doesn't look good. But I think I can explain both why it's going to get better, but also why West Ham have been struggling for so long. Well, like the last couple of years, especially last year, it's been very painful. And it all comes down to a transition they've been trying to complete. They're very close to completing. How to move away from David Moyes' direct counter-attacking football to possession-based football. And this is a really hard transition to make. To spell it out, we've got a play style we were here from The Athletic. This is David Moyes' final season at West Ham. And if you want a full breakdown of every individual stat, we've got an article breaking it down. But it's kind of self-explanatory. And I think we all know how a West Ham side under David Moyes would play. Defending, they're going to be defending deep, a low defensive line, they're not going to be pressing high. In terms of build-up, what build-up? They're going to be kicking it long most of the time. They might bait a bit of pressure, but they're a very direct side, which extends to what they do in possession. They're not a team that wants to dominate the ball high up the pitch. They want to play quick passes in behind to create high quality chances. And, you know, it's a bit of a mocking tone I'm taking, but it works. They create high quality chances under David Moyes because you get the likes of Jared Bowen, Antonio and Kudus into great positions behind the defensive line one-on-one. But how do you take a team playing like this and change it to a team playing like under Graham Potter? It's the polar opposite. This is Graham Potter's final season at Brighton before he moves to Chelsea, which explains why he looks younger and happier.
Fresh, doesn't he?
He does, bless him. But the point is, this is so different to the way West Ham played under Moyes. We could leave it there and say this is a difficult transition to make, right? But I want to go a step further just to really show, like, for a player playing under David Moyes, how difficult it would be to make that step up. So, for example, in build-up, straight away there would be major changes. The likes of Areola, Mavropanos, Soufal, some Moyes stalwarts, they would be asked to suddenly play out under pressure, inviting pressure from opposition players, and if they're being pressed, they can't be kicking it long, they need to maintain possession. Next, we have the midfield, and there's more granular changes here for some of these players. Thomas Souček and Alvarez, I think Alvarez was like the Declan Rice replacement, and these are two archetypal David Moyes players. Huge change in their expectation. They would be asked to play the ball through midfield, which would mean a couple of things. First of all, they'd be asked to probably play accurate, precise passes between opposition players through the lines, something they weren't doing as much before. And on top of that, the midfielders receiving those passes, they would be asked to like lay the ball off quickly or maybe even round the player pressing them. And it's not just like a change in technical level, right? It's also mentality. Under David Moyes, in a more direct system, there is going to be an emphasis on playing quick passes forward. They might be risky, but if it doesn't work out, you're a defensive team, you've got most of the players on your team behind the ball. So if you lose it, it's fine, you can quickly regroup. That's not the case in a possession-based team, where the aim is generally to move your players who are most dangerous in front of goal as far forward as possible. And you might look a bit more vulnerable, like this situation here. And in these scenarios, you need to make sure you keep the ball. If both fullbacks, for example, have committed forward, you can't be playing risky passes. You need to know to be patient. And it's like a wordy way of saying it, but regulate the tempo of the match. So that's a huge change, again, in mentality for these players and a question of can they execute that? And finally, we have the forward players. And some of these players are the most iconic players for under West Ham of the Premier League era. Mikel Antonio and Jared Bowen. I mean, Bowen's been one of the best Premier League players over the last few years under David Moyes. If there's no defender in his way, or there's one who's retreating back towards their goal, and momentum's on Jared Bowen's side, he's one of the best players in the Premier League at this, manipulating the defender, running at them, and then cutting inside or scoring or creating a chance. What happens then if you take that situation away? Now, the momentum won't be on his side. Momentum would be on the defender's side. He could be receiving the ball and being asked to take players on. And Jared Bowen is good at a lot of things, but while he's a right winger on paper, dribbling has never actually been one of his strongest attributes. And compared to other wingers, he's, I think, barely completed around like 1.5 dribbles per 90. So big change for Jared Bowen potentially. Also for Mikel Antonio. He's someone who's excelled in the Premier League, but bullying defenders using his physicality, isolated against them, and then laying the ball off in space. What happens to him if you put him in tighter spaces and ask him to keep the ball on the ground and lay it off to other players? How good is his first touch? Will he be able to adapt to this sort of thing? Who knows? This is a big question for a lot of these players. And I think it's probably clear at this point, not all of these players, this is, remember, just before last season in the summer of 2024, not all of them would be able to make such a huge swing and adaptation to a Lopetegui or Potter. So you might need to do a bit of a recruitment drive, right? But this is where West Ham go wrong, in my opinion. First of all, in goal, Alphonse Areola, not the best ball-playing goalkeeper, and West Ham don't sign a replacement. Centre-back, they sign Jean-Claire Todibo, who on paper is a brilliant centre-back.
Nice.
Yeah, a superb ball-playing defender. That's what he's known for. Feels like the perfect signing, but maybe a bit too much too soon, and he also struggles with fitness. So he actually spends a lot of the season coming off before the 60-minute mark. So you ended up playing Mavropanos there, alongside Max Kilman, who, another new signing, actually think he's been pretty good, but not the same quality as Todibo. So same sort of problems in defence, not much change there. Fullback, they've brought in Wan-Bissaka, the one addition, but you're still left with Soufal, Emerson and Cresswell, three David Moyes stalwarts. You're still relying on them to make the adaptation to a possession-based style of play. In midfield, they make quite a few additions, but it ends up being Alvarez and Thomas Souček playing the most minutes in midfield still. Well, they signed Carlos Soler on loan from PSG, and I think he's the perfect example of a player who's too much too soon. He's a tricky, technical midfielder. The reason he's playing at PSG is because he's not going to be put under much defensive pressure. He is at West Ham, and I don't think it's surprising they don't end up making his loan permanent, and he doesn't play too much. James Ward-Prowse comes back on loan for, I think, the second half of the season. Does play quite a bit under Potter, but still, it's not the strongest midfield here. And then we get to the attackers, and I think this is where a lot of sins are committed. They sign Luis Guilherme to back up Jared Bowen, but he gets injuries and just seems to never be trusted by Potter or Lopetegui, so doesn't end up playing that much. They signed Crescencio Somerville, who, in my opinion, is actually a really good signing.
Yes.
Yeah, he had a really good season at Leeds in the Championship. I think he will prove good, but he did get injured and didn't even reach 800 Premier League minutes. So another player who doesn't actually start that much. They also signed Niklas Füllkrug to back up Antonio, who, I mean, no spoilers, gets injured a lot.
And kind of old as well.
Yeah, kind of old as well. So he doesn't play that much. And when Antonio is also ruled out for the second half of the season, this is the team that Graham Potter is left with. It's not surprising then that this team doesn't do particularly well, and it's not surprising considering how big of a transition they've had to make. But bringing it back to your question, Ayo, of why I think they are going to do well.
Are you going to give me some optimism?
I am going to give you optimism.
Let's do it.
Finally, for I think the first time in the show. I actually think West Ham have finally finished their rebuild. Maybe not finished, but they've done enough to make Potter's style of football work. They've signed Mads Hermansen from Leicester. Shot stopping might not be as strong as Areola at his best. He's not had the best start to the season, but much better on the ball, I think it's clear. So that's, I think, going to be an upgrade for Potter in terms of playing out from the back. At centre-back, they've signed Igor as decent depth, and it's worth saying Todibo, a year under his belt of Premier League football, you'd hope his fitness has improved, so hopefully he should be starting a bit more than Mavropanos. Left back, I think there's been a really big upgrade. They've signed Malik Diouf from Slavia Prague, and I think he's had a really good start to the season, got a great left foot, he's delivered a couple of really nice crosses so far. And if that isn't enough, they've also signed Kyle Walker-Peters, who at Southampton last year was a right back, also played left wing. He's actually one of their best attacking players, which is good for Walker-Peters, also shows Southampton not the best team in the Premier League last season. Surprise. But I think this is still good depth at the back now. In midfield, they've only made one central midfield signing, but I think it's a good one. It's Magassa from Monaco. And there's an analyst for West Ham called Callum Goodhall who pointed out in Ligue 1 Magassa, he didn't play many minutes, he's still a very young player, but I think he was top of the league for ball recoveries per 90. We didn't have time to mention it, but it's also a huge change for West Ham out of possession too. We've only covered the big changes in possession, but you're asking a lot of players who were playing under David Moyes to step much higher up the pitch, be more intense in their defending, keep a higher line, and you're going to need players in that setup who can win the ball back very quickly. Magassa, being good at ball recovery, should be a smart addition. Talking of smart additions, we've got Mateus Fernandes, another Southampton signing. I think he was one of the most underrated players in the Premier League last season. And we've got Somerville back from injury, we've got Füllkrug back from injury for now, and if that's not enough, they've also signed Callum Wilson. And this team just looks a lot better, a lot more suited to Potter style of football. It might not be like incredibly full of depth, but I think it's just enough to ease the pressure on him if they give him time throughout the season to improve.
That was Alex's way of saying, yeah, but no, but Yeah, JJ. So do you trust in his inevitable optimism of West Ham this season?
I think the problem with supporting West Ham or managing West Ham is that you basically have a bad season, then you have a good season, and then you might have a couple of good seasons, then a bad season. You basically level out always. So people are trapped. And what's the point of supporting a team if you're never going to achieve anything? It's very frustrating. If something doesn't work for a while, you want to change it. Then it does work, and then you want to change that. You see like their XGA and XGA, as we looked at this graph here, you see that under Moyes, even when they were doing well, they weren't doing that well. So you can see where people would be frustrated and want to change, because like what you think you're seeing is actually playing out on the pitch. They're conceding more chances than they're creating. That's not what you want. You don't want your team to do that. Lopetegui made it much worse, and so that's also why people didn't like him. But Potter seems to be making them a bit more defensively solid first. The first thing you focus on is going back to basics, make them better defensively. But actually, overall, I don't think it matters, because if we're just like prescribing to the idea that basically there's an economic model where the team who has the highest wages should finish first, and the opposite is true as well. And that's kind of, over time, that kind of balances out. Now, West Ham are basically in the middle, so they should finish mid-table, which is kind of where they are. But lots of teams work really well over their budget. Teams like Brentford historically have done very well. And so you get some anomalies that will jump over that, it'll break the rule. And so West Ham get pushed a bit further down. And so they finish round about 14th, 16th, which is kind of where they are. So this is what you get. So what can you really expect? What can you expect? David Moyes won the Conference League, that's good. But can you expect that every year? Probably not. And also, when you look at these small margins that define like how well a team does, West Ham should win some games and lose some games because they're middle, they're mid. This is what you've got. But like, there's an example of them beating Nottingham Forest the other day. So Nottingham Forest versus West Ham was 0-0, pretty boring for most of the game. No chances really created for either side. Yeah. Until eventually West Ham managed to score this quite scrappy goal that Bowen punts into the bottom corner. He's a great player, Bowen. The second goal that kills off the game is when Nottingham Forest now pushing into them to try and get back into the game. Here's Nottingham Forest on the ball. The ball is passed backwards because they can't get through the block. The ball goes back to a defender. Defender pushes it into Morgan Gibbs-White. Paquetá jumps into him, and as you can see here, fouls him. You're not supposed to be upside down. That's a foul. The ball goes back towards Murillo, who then looks up, tries to ping the ball across. Paquetá gets up, no foul. And you can see the referee's like, it's fine, on you go. And then he comes in, blocks the ball. It lands with Somerville, I think, over here, who then runs towards the box and wins a penalty. That gives them 2-0, game's done. So West Ham, for 3-0, you think, oh, they've won that. Graham Potter's got it. They don't. It should have been a 0-0. It was like, they're exactly the same as Nottingham Forest, kind of in the middle there. So I don't think, like, in terms of whether Potter should be under pressure or not, I think it's far too early to say with him, really. But also, it's probably not going to get much better. It's probably going to be the same, and it probably always will be.
I mean, I do like the look of Somerville, but like, what is the point of changing manager if you're never really gonna get any further than?
Well,
when
some
you were
can
just
get more
before?
out of it. Like you look at Thomas Frank, what he did at Brentford, then you can, but that's also to do with recruitment. And like Alex has said, the recruitment is much better this summer.
Yeah.
But then there's also what happened last summer. So you're trying to catch up constantly. Maybe Potter will turn them into a team that can push eventually for 7th, 6th. Do you want to wait that long? Everyone else is getting better quicker.
I don't know. I just want to see Graham Potter cook, man. I mean, I've heard so much about him being the next big thing. Maybe this is his opportunity. We might just have to wait. All right, let's leave it there, because it's not just managers that are under pressure. Premier League players are as well. Sam Tighe is going to be delving into one of the best Premier League players who probably hasn't had the best season so far by his standards.
Welcome to What's Changed, presented by BOYLE Sports. Mohamed Salah has been surprisingly quiet for Liverpool so far this season. He does have 2 goal contributions in 3 games, but that doesn't tell the whole story. So what's changed? And should there be concern? Salah has been quiet because he's been less involved. Small sample size alert, but he's only taken 4 shots in 3 games. His goal contributions have come in the dying moments, and most tellingly, his touch count has nosedived. This is a natural consequence of stacking the forward line with fresh quality. Florian Wirtz likes to drop deep to find the ball. Liverpool are happy to play direct to Hugo Ekitike. He prefers to drift to the left, which makes Cody Gakpo the more likely link-up. Also, Trent Alexander-Arnold is gone. He played more progressive passes than any Liverpool player last season and operated close to Salah. All of this has left the winger quite removed from play at times. Things will change again now that Alexander Isak has signed, and perhaps the Swedes' greater variety of movement will be key to getting Salah back on top.
Now, before we inevitably move on to Forest, I want to throw a few names at you. Victor Pereira, Keith Andrews, Unai Emery, Aston Villa. Not many people are talking about the season Aston Villa have had so far. So let's start there, Alex. Is there a difference between a bad start or a bad fit?
Yeah, Emery is in a bit of an odd place for me because, a bit of transparency here. I'm a massive football nerd, right? So last season, I, like many people do with social lives, spent a weekend just watching Aston Villa's games. I think like 5 to 10 matches, right? And I'd done the same thing the season prior in 23-24. And do you know what? My notes are basically the same. Emery's system just has barely changed over the past couple of years. And I watched their game against Brentford before the show just to see, has there been any more changes here? And there hasn't. And it's not just like a frustration if I want this guy to do something different. In the Brentford game, for example, Villa's build-up patterns are still very similar to what they were doing a couple of years ago, which means if you're an opposition manager trying to think, how can we press Villa? How can we try and win the ball off them? Your plans, you're not being challenged, I would say, as much as other managers who are changing constantly. You know what Villa are going to do. And I think that's definitely caught them this year. This is a chart from my game plan showing the possession losses so far in the Premier League in defensive midfield thirds. All right, less nerdy speak. It's just a good measure of how successful teams, I think, have been of getting from point A to point B in build-up. And Villa are down with some of the weaker teams in the Premier League, like Wolves and West Ham, but consistently losing the ball during build-up. And like I said, during the Brentford game, it's shown teams just know what they're going to do. And I think if Emery is going to get Villa higher up the table, he's going to need to change something, just evolve a little bit to be a bit more unpredictable.
Kick it long.
Yes. Otherwise, I think the pressure is going to get to him, right?
Yeah, okay. Talk to me. Keith Andrews, Brentford.
As we all know, Brentford lost some key players in the summer, and we don't yet know enough about Keith Andrews to know whether he's very good at what he's doing.
Yeah.
We will see soon. I'm not possibly going to say he's under pressure, because I don't think he is.
Okay, I like that. Right, let's move on finally to Nottingham Forest. Nuno Espirito Santo. He's been sacked. It's over. The weird thing is, I wasn't sure this was going to last the distance, especially with some sort of volatile press conferences. And we've spoken about it on The Athletics. Doesn't get on with the owner, Marinakis, and obviously there's a bit of tension with Edu as well. Were you shocked that he was shown the door?
I wasn't, partly because of the coverage you've just spoken about. It seemed like the writing was on the wall. But caveat here, I might be in danger of giving Forest too much credit.
Oh, wow.
But I basically view him as an aggressive startup, right? Marinakis, since Forest had got to the Premier League, he's seemed laser focused on turning Nottingham Forest into one of the best teams in the league as fast as possible. And it's not just vibes, I think that's reflected in a lot of decisions he's made. We can think of that huge recruitment drive he did in his first summer.
20 odd players or something?
Right, they built a Premier League team from scratch. They basically said, well, there is no way we're going to get relegated. Since then, Forest have had a higher net spend than Newcastle and Manchester City in the Premier League. He's continued that ambition. It's also off the pitch as well. They signed Edu. I think now he's known as the guy who sort of forced Nuno out potentially. But it's worth saying when he signed, I think it was announced in January, it was seen as a big coup from Arsenal, and he's taking on more of a global role. So it's not even just focused on Nottingham Forest. So when you think of Forest in that way as this sort of aggressive startup, and you think what we were all saying at the beginning of the season, we sat here at this table, other people doing Premier League predictions said similar things. Forest, they're going down the table. They're not going to keep doing well under Nuno. They'll get found out. The luck won't be with them. Like I said, there are definitely a lot of reasons why Nuno has gone. But you can also say, it feels like they're skipping that step where Nuno gets found out and just getting on to the next guy.
Okay, and the next guy is?
Ange Postecoglou. But will he make them better? It's what we've seen, as Alex was talking about with Nuno last season. So you see halfway through the season, so Forest don't really change what they're doing at all last season at all. They were scoring early, protecting the lead, defending it really well. And those early leads just give you an advantage. And they were decent to watch, right? They did the same thing most of the season. And then you can see halfway through the season, according to expected goals for and against, that it just suddenly stopped working as well. Now, this could be because teams knew exactly what they were doing, or because they got nervous and the pressure started to build. There's loads of reasons, and we don't know exactly why. The numbers are basically the same underneath the hood. But this season, Nuno had started making them more possession-based. In fact, I think I heard Chris Wood talking about how during the summer they wanted to add more things to their arsenal, so they would have more ways of beating teams, not always be the same. Because you can't, you've got to develop. And Nuno had started to do that. But Postecoglou, a very different kind of manager, as everyone knows. He's very principled, he's more attack-minded, he wants them to be fun. But as you can see here, Spurs, when he took them over, he made them a bit more attacking, that was good. But this bit here, this is bad. This is not what you want. You can see that they seem to have let in an awful lot of XG and actual goals during his time there. That is the exact opposite of the thing that Nottingham Forest were good at last season. So it's a different kind of manager, but will he take them to the next level? Well, we don't know. But one of the advantages that Postecoglou has is that having been at Spurs and stayed very principled for a long time, like I won't change from this, he can now start again and be a bit more pragmatic if he wants. He can make them play in a slightly different way. But the things that Postecoglou did at Spurs that was getting them these terrible numbers is that, like Emery, like Alex is talking about, the build-up is always the same. And the build-up always leads to huge gaps that when they lose the ball and they turn over possession, they are susceptible to dangerous counterattacks and people can just run through them. So that is the thing. And if you're always pressing high and you're always playing a high line, teams can get at you. And Nottingham Forest have less good players, arguably, and I am making the argument, than Spurs. And so there's a chance that it could go very, very well. There's also another more real chance.
So Alex, does Postecoglou have the players to make his system work?
I think a lot of people seem to believe that he hasn't got the players to make it work. And in fairness, we were just talking about with West Ham, it is a really big change. You're going to be going from Nuno Santo, who this seems very similar to David Moyes, this is Nottingham Forest from last season, into Ange Postecoglou, Tottenham last season. Again, it's the polar opposite. I can understand why people have a lot of concerns that this isn't going to work out. But in Daniel Taylor's article, the inside read of what happened to Nuno, there was like a line that from some sources said that Postecoglou was actually being shaped to come in way before he actually did, like before a ball was even kicked during the season. And I think if you look at their recruitment, personally, I can maybe see where they're coming from. So let's do the thing we did at West Ham, where we look through the different positions and see would these guys be suited to such a big swing in style. At the back, you've got Murillo, who I think spends most of his time trying not to be a defender and wants to play as a striker, so he'll be fine. Milenkovic seems a bit, a bit more of a low block defender, but that's okay. They've brought in Jay Cunha from Brazil, who seems like a much more of a ball-playing defender based on his highlights from like the Club World Cup for Botafogo. So defence should be okay. Same with the fullbacks. This is really where like my personal opinion about recruiting for Postecoglou over Nuno comes in, because Forest signed Alexander Zinchenko and they were in before for Rico Lewis, two players who make their name as fullbacks inverting into midfield. You don't sign that for Nuno. You sign that for the manager who comes after them, in my opinion. So,
wow.
Seems like a player who should be suited to Postecoglou. Same as Savannah for Juventus, another versatile fullback, has like shifted into a back three at Juve. That's good depth for Aino, I think is a pretty solid fullback anyway. Defence seems good. In midfield, they've added Douglas Luiz. Not much to say there. Like, very strong Premier League player for Villa, should be fine in a possession-based team. Further forward, they've added Omari Hutchinson. I know he's excluded from the Europa League squad, but I think he's quite a talented player. And it's worth saying, of course, him and Gibbs White, both technically gifted guys. Maybe they struggle. Hutchinson from Ipswich, Gibbs White from Forest last season, to suddenly breaking down more low blocks, as you probably would in a Postecoglou team. If that's the case, I think Forest will still be okay, because their wingers and the players they've got there actually think they're really suited to Postecoglou. Hudson-Odoi, I think, is like a dream winger in a sense. He might not be much of a two-way winger. He's more of a right-footed, cut-inside sort of guy. But even then, he's someone who doesn't need to be like on the counter-attack to dribble past someone. And when he cuts inside on his right foot, he can make anything happen, like a cross or a shot. So left side, I think you're solid. They've brought in Dan Ndoye. They've also brought in James McAtee from Manchester City, who can come inside almost like a fourth midfielder. And I think coming through at Manchester City means you're going to be fine in a possession-based team. That's kind of what you do. And if that wasn't enough, they've also signed Delane Backwell from Strasbourg, who last season in Ligue 1 was one of the best dribblers in the league. So if, like we said before with Bowen, the Bowen problem, if defenders are going to be tracking him out wide, I bet on Backwell to dribble past him. I think they're pretty well stocked here. And finally, we have the striker, Chris Wood. And Chris Wood, I think, had a very strong season last year. In terms of strikers, had the lowest percentiles for touches in the midfield third, the final third, which makes sense. It's not really his game. He might do one or two layoffs during the counter-attack, but he's going to focus on getting in the box and getting on the end of chances. If that doesn't work for Ange Postecoglou, guess what? They've got Arnold Calimundo from Rennes, who, if you just want like a really bite-sized description, think of him as a French Lautaro Martinez. He might be small, but he packs a punch. He can hold the ball up with his back to goal. Really strong player. He's also really fast too. And he also played, Rennes were quite a counter-attacking side, but he's played in a more possession-based system too. I think he's pretty versatile. So yes, while the transition is going to be a big one, and I understand people's concerns, when you look at the signings they made, they actually seem quietly pretty well set up to make that transition.
Wow, okay. Slight optimism, what are you thinking?
Well, I think it would be nice if it worked. He's tended to have, like, at Celtic, there was the best team in the league, you know, and then at Spurs, obviously didn't work towards the second half of the season, still won the cup. But he had a lot of injuries to deal with. And I think that is relevant to probably why those numbers were so poor. This team is very ambitious. So is Postecoglou. His man management is very strong. If you can get this group of players together and galvanised, who knows what they could achieve. But it's probably upper mid-table, so that's expectation. Is that enough for Marinakis?
I don't know, but he's Japanese champion, he's Australian champion, he's Scottish champion. He's also a Europa League winner. Maybe another Europa League. Forest fans, what are you thinking?
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Amy Lawrence and James Horncastle. With the latest transfer news and insights on every Premier League story that matters, theathletic.com puts you inside football.